Welcome to Gaming, and this is the first of our What Makes It Great episodes. Every few releases we'll be picking out a specific game that has achieved legendary status, and we'll be drilling down into what has propelled it to such heights and what it means to us personally. So, my name, as ever, is John Robertson. I'm still joined by Stace Harman, and let's get into what makes Final Fantasy VII so great.
So I was listening back to our Games of the Generation episode of the podcast the other day because for research, but also because I'm narcissistic like that. And one of the games you mentioned was one of your top picks, and one of the most impactful as well, was Final Fantasy VII,
Final Fantasy
which
VII
got me
remake.
The Final Fantasy VII remake, absolutely, to qualify it for Game of the Generation. I see what you did there, sneaky. And that got me thinking about my experience with that game. And I the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, I'm going to read more about this. The original game. Back in 97, when I was a tender 17 years old. And I thought more about it, and I'd researched, and I'd watched some videos and read some stuff, and I did remember how awesome and how much impact that game had on me and how awesome it was. And there's just like a whole list of stuff. And what I'd like to do is see if the stuff that I remember being awesome about it, or what it meant to me, is tallies up with yours, or where they kind of cross over. So the materia system was one of the huge things for me. Like that, probably more than anything else, that's the thing that I think about when I think about Final Fantasy VII. The story probably comes in second. And by story, I mean more the themes and the characters, because I didn't really remember specifically the story. And then just the sheer size of the world and the feeling of freedom and exploration that comes in when you get some of the airship and the submarine and stuff. Now, so how much of that tallies up with your, like, where do you rank sort of the most important things for you with Final Fantasy VII?
So, yeah, all of those things are important to me. So I was a bit younger when I played it. I was 12, just turning 13 when I played it, or that's when it came out anyway, and I remember getting it very shortly after it came out. So yeah, the story would be my number one thing, and that the narrative, like everything, the plot, the characters, whatever, everything in relation to the narrative and the story. Yes, the materia system as one of the sort of gameplay elements. I think the turn-based battle system in general, but the materia being a huge part of what made that good. Yeah, I definitely would highlight that as well. I also think the music and the visuals, the soundtrack is just, like, in my mind, it's just legendary. Like, it is the soundtrack. Like the victory music, the main theme, like everything, all the themes for each location, all of that stuff. And yeah, the visuals, like, I don't think I'd ever seen visuals in a game. Well, I know I hadn't seen the visuals close to as good as that. Like the detail on all the backgrounds, the amount of personality in the characters, they're really blocky faces and big blocky, sort of like cooked ham like hands, like, but they were just so full of personality. But yeah, all of that. And I'd never played a game like that, and I like, so much of the game is like different elements of the game are the benchmark for other games. Like, it's the benchmark turn-based battle system. It's the benchmark magic/materia system. Midgar is the benchmark location. Like, the characters or the little gang of characters are the benchmark, like, primary cast of characters. And the bad guy as well, Sephiroth, is like the benchmark bad guy.
Well, because I think also because they are as far from two-dimensional. No pun intended, because it's 3D. As far from two-dimensional as it was likely to get, or could get, because they actually felt like the characters, including the bad guys, had actual motivations. They had actual things they were trying to do that they cared about, not just this is the de facto bad guy and you have to kill them. They're evil. The end. Like they had far more going on, which made them far more interesting.
Well, they all had real motivations, and a lot of their motivations are kind of come from the same place as well. Like, thinking about this, they're all really trying to survive after having lost something. So Cloud is trying to survive after having lost his position in soldier and lost, like, sort of the thing that gave him meaning in life, and now he's just trying to survive by doing jobs as a mercenary and doing whatever. Maybe also, though he wouldn't want to admit it at the start of the game, also trying to survive by finding a group of like a support network, a family again.
Yeah, something to belong to. Yeah.
Yeah. Tifa is trying to believe that, like, you know, her life is really bad now, but those past happy memories that she had can somehow come back to her, and maybe Cloud coming back is a part of that. Barrett is trying to survive, keep him alive, keep his daughter alive, keep the people that he's protecting alive, by surviving this harsh world that they're in and trying to bring down Shinra. So they've all got this like survival aspect.
They're all looking for a purpose, right? Like, and that's we can all relate to that. Particularly, even though we are, you know, I was 17, you were 12. Those are still formative years in one way or another, in different ways, but in one way or another. And you can definitely relate to that notion of wanting a purpose, needing a direction, needing to commit yourself to something in order to get through life.
Yeah, and they're all totally, and they're all different as well. Like all of like their motivations are. And what they're trying to gain, meaning. Sometimes those meanings conflict with one another. So there's tensions and breakup of the group. Like it's not just this homogenous group in which everyone, you know, like the Power Rangers or something. Everyone is like on the same team going towards the same thing. No, there's
they're
like
not
tension.
all pointed in the same direction. Yeah, they want different things. Yeah, and that brings them into conflict with each other. Yeah, which is absolutely is part of that.
But makes them just feel more real. Like they're individuals rather than just a one leg of a you know, this singular beast going through the world doing all this stuff, beating all these people. Like no, like there's trouble in paradise. Like they're not there's that mini story going on between, well, it's not mini, it's the primary story, you could argue, but there's that story going on between the protagonists, the primary cast, and then the other story around them is like, well, how can we do this bigger? How do we save the planet whilst we're arguing with ourselves all the time?
Yeah, and that's some of the stuff at the very beginning I started making notes about the things I remembered, and those I've already mentioned. But in terms of the themes, it was the things of like rebellion, eco-terrorism, social mobility, climate change, and then I've got another sentence right immediately following that says, plus I really fancied Tifa. So it wasn't all, you know, I wasn't entirely like, oh wow, this is so super serious, I'm really into this. I also fancied Tifa, so that was a thing. And it came on 3 discs, which felt like an amazing thing at the time, even though...
Well, it felt like a huge event when you got that box. And the box
it
was
did. Like a double
big.
dual CD case, and it was like, even though what that meant was there was lots of cutscenes, which meant lots of non-interactive sequences, which often we deride games for that. Metal Gear Solid often gets, the finger pointed at it for doing that kind of stuff. But they felt like rewards. They felt like, you know, you get to a cutscene and it's like this has some merit rather than just, oh, this is time for me to go and get a drink.
Yeah, well, JRPGs of this sort tend to be, when I say of this sort, like you could argue this is the game that defined this form of JRPG. They are sometimes attacked for being the cutscenes of the carrot on the stick. Like you're kind of doing just this like of just boring drudge work to get to your reward of the cutscene. And like, I can see like some people, like you might think of it like that in Final Fantasy, but those cutscenes were absolutely just ridiculously good, certainly for the time. And, you know, the stuff that you were doing in between was also excellent as well. But some of the cutscenes, like I think still like the cutscene I remember most of any cutscene in any game, and I just remember being blown away from it, is that sequence at the end of the Midgar section. So you're probably 10, 15 hours into the game. And you're at Shinra headquarters and you've made your way all the way back down to the bottom and you've rescued Red, and Cloud, Tifa, Barrett, Red are in the... is Ares there? Yeah, Ares is there as well. And you get in that little mini truck thing, and Barrett can barely fit in, and then it goes up the stairs and Cloud's on his bike, and that cutscene and the music, all that stuff is just freaking amazing, like absolutely incredible.
And I think so at the time I'd never played anything like it, but I don't know in terms of the impact it had on me. I don't know that I have played, certainly not another JRPG that has had that much initial impact on me. So I really liked Final Fantasy VII and 12 are my two favorite Final Fantasies. I'm not really a kind of connoisseur of the series like you are. I'm not. Those are the two ones that stick out for me, and I've been back to 12 in a remaster, but not to 7. And some of that is the gameplay systems, the materia and the gambits in 12. I feel like have a similar basis. They're both kind of there's a notion of programming in both of them, and you're experimenting and trying different things, and you're given that room to experiment. And I think that's looking back on it, like getting into that materia system was like a revelation. I think that was one of the things that getting into that and thinking, I have never played a game like this, as in not just like this, the game is like this. I've never played a game in this way, in this manner before. And I loved it and still love it. And watching the videos to kind of prep for this. So, oh, wow. Yeah. And just the materia names, the summons, all of this stuff is like there's so much to it that I'd thought I'd forgotten, but realised that it's kind of been there all along. And I'm probably looking for another game to have the courage to do that again, because it can be quite off-putting. It's quite a big risk to take in a massive, huge budget AAA game to say, well, a lot of people aren't going to, they'll scratch the surface of it, but they're not going to go very deep on this, and that's okay. We're allowing players to kind of set up their own complexity and how much they want to engage with this particular system.
Like if you don't engage with it, you can kind of just grind through it and just level up far enough, and you'll eventually be good enough to defeat whatever, well, mostly whatever you want to defeat. I like the materia system. Well, as I said, it's like the benchmark for a magic system in a game. I thought it was really smart. Like, looking back on it at the time, I wasn't really necessarily thinking this, but really smart to attach it to gear. So materia slots into your sword or your the bangle thing that whatever it's called that you wear around your wrists, whatever gear you've got attached, that's where your materia plugs into. So changing a weapon isn't just a case of saying, okay, I'm now just going to go +1 on this weapon. It could wildly change the slots that you've got available for materia, not just make them less. It could have more slots. Well, it might just have 6 individual slots rather than, say, a 2, a 2, and a 4, a 2, a 2, and a 1, sorry. So you can't link materia. Yeah. And that would be a huge thing. Like, it's like, oh, wow, okay, so how do I really want that sword, but then how do I redistribute the materia across my party in order to retain what I've just had? Or do I just say, okay, this is the time to change, and I'm just going to change that the whole thing? But it's
a clever way. I think it's a cleverly designed way of easing you into that experimentation through design integration of like, well, you're going to want to get new weapons. They're going to have different slot configurations. So that gently convinces you or encourages you to experiment with what you're doing rather than just, I can have the same thing, but +1, +2 and all the rest of it. It makes you think, well, okay, if they're not linked slots or if they are linked slots, how does that change what I want to do? And should I just, try something completely different for the next 10 hours, because why not? You have the freedom to do that. It doesn't break it's possible to, go from a very good build to a very bad one, but you can then just correct that straight away. Like there's no real punishment for experimentation. There's just a lot of rewards, and you can get a lot out of just tweaking that system, just for the sake of it, sometimes experimenting and not needing the most efficient build, but just looking for interesting interactions. And that was and still is, I think, an incredibly well-designed system that it tricks you into, not doesn't trick you, but it doesn't say, here's everything you need to know about materia, go. It just says, there's this system, try it when you want and see what you can do with it. And that's a very well-designed system that just encourages the player rather than punishes them.
Yeah, and it's well-designed as well from the perspective of, if we go back to what we were saying towards the start and about how the characters are really good and the characterization in general is really good, and they're full of personality and whatever. The materia system and the weapon system kind of builds on that as well, because the way that the characters level up, like they just get a bunch of XP after each battle. And their core character is leveled up, and you don't decide, okay, I want to put 1 point into luck, I want 1 point into vitality, 1 point into this. And it's really abstracted concepts like that are kind of very pernickety, and like Western RPGs really love to use them. I like those systems, but I think they can take away from the character of the game, of of the protagonists when you compare it to something like Final Fantasy VII, because by having because essentially what's happening is all the characters are kind of base characters that are being given XP and their stats are being changed without your say-so, without you specifically choosing them. But you add character and you add personality and you add difference by the materia and the weapons that you give them. So it kind of buffs their personality by you engaging, you alter them in a way that's kind of tangible rather than abstract. Like, it's easy to understand, I give you this material and I give you this weapon, and that's a very humanistic sort of thing, like imparting something to someone, rather than just saying, I'm now going to go into your brain, I'm now going to go into your muscle sinew and give you +1 vitality or +1 luck. That's very abstract, it's very gamey. Whereas by just giving people things, and that's how you build difference and personality of action in your characters, makes them feel that bit more human, like you're just swapping items between them and it's changing them all around rather than just these numbers that you're adding.
And it absolutely, and it means that you can then embrace that idea of, well, perhaps this weapon isn't as efficient, or perhaps this armor isn't as good, or whatever it might be, but it does other stuff. Like, because in the real world, your preferences are your preferences. You might not. That's why, we love certain games that aren't the pinnacle of game design. It's just what it means to you. It's like it is, as you say, that human element of idiosyncratic preference of, like, well, I want my version of Red 13 to be this, and yours might be completely different. And it's like, but that's just how I see that character. And
it's completely different through the things that we've given them rather than the numbers to say have +1, +2, have +3. Like, you are doing that, you are still doing that to them, but you're doing it, you're doing it in a way that kind of makes sense for the world, makes sense just on a real life level. Like, I give you this and I give you that. Like,
well, it's like giving somebody a present, isn't it? It's like me giving you a book versus me giving you a set of dumbbells. Like, assuming you use both of those things, then one of them is going to increase one of your stats and one of them is going to increase another one. But that's a far more human interaction and a far more natural thought process to go through than, I'm going to tweak this number to make it +1 or +2. So the characters, I mean, there's some, I had favourites. Tifa definitely was one of my favourites. And Yuffie, Vincent was another one. I think Vincent was awesome. But the
secret characters.
It was, well, it was, perhaps that was why. And I don't think until recently, and I was doing the research and we talked about it, I don't think I even realised that they were secret characters. It wasn't like a thing that I set out to find. It was just exploration. And perhaps that was part of why I liked them so much. It was like that almost a reward for exploring. Yeah. Which, well, yeah.
On the characters, I think I like, I don't know. I like them all. But I think what I like about some of the characters, Cloud and Tifa, for example, are that they're not like stereotypical goodies. You could argue that they're both actually quite selfish. Cloud, well, certainly at the start of the game, Cloud is just out for himself, and he's willing to hurt people in order to make that happen. He's willing to kill, like, essentially just innocent people doing their jobs in order to get his money. And Tifa, like, wanting to really, like, bring her old memories back, live a kind of life similar to her past life. Her motivations are all just about herself, really. Like, they are, but that makes them more likable because it makes them more human. Like, they're not just these shells of superhero kind of characters with these selfless motivations working towards everything. And I think that's quite a good element of the game. Like, it doesn't shy away from characterizing these people and their actions as not wholly good. Like, yes, they're trying to save the planet. Yes, Barrett's, Avalanche, the organization, the eco-terrorist, whatever, the militia, the freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them, are trying to ultimately save the people of the slums. But in doing so, they're blowing stuff up that is hurting and killing regular people, like those people that work for Shinra that are dying in that attack or their lives are being ruined. They haven't done anything wrong. All they're doing is just trying to feed their family and survive like everyone else. And the game does touch upon that. I think Final Fantasy VII Remake actually touches upon that much better. There's a lot more stuff in that, but the original does as well. That is still a main theme of the original. So yeah, like
what is that? That idea of one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. I mean, but the
game is showing both sides of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's done in a way that doesn't just. It's not trying to make you sympathise with what are really the bad guys. It's just showing you that it's a bit more complicated. Than
it's subjective. Like you could, like the people that they're killing, or like, someone died in that Mako reactor explosion is not going home today again. Like their family that has to live through that, like, they're not good guys, are they? Like they're bad guys. Like they are Cloud and Barrett and everyone. They are the worst people on earth. They have performed the most destructive act that family's ever going to go through in their entire existence.
Had it not been for their direct actions, that person would not have died. I mean, there is no like, they were going to die anyway. Like, no, there wasn't a big war going on that people were just going to die from. It was like, this is a thing that you have directly caused.
And you could say, well, look at the bigger picture. There's a bigger picture. It's like, okay, but the bigger picture for that individual family has just it's been ruined. It's gone. Like that's it now. That family is over. And the game doesn't shy away from saying, like, you are playing as people here. The whole world doesn't think, and it's not just a matter of, well, they're wrong and you're right. It's like, no, you're both wrong and you're both right.
And it doesn't, I think what's particularly good is that it doesn't use that as some sort of clever or even contrite third act reveal where it's surprise, actually you're the bad guy. So it's right there up from the beginning. So okay, well I need to get used to this if I'm going to be, if I'm going to root for these guys, and you do. And the way that you were describing Tifa then reminded me of Simon Pegg's character in World's End. That he's just doing this stuff for himself, but his reasons for doing that are deeper than just the surface level stuff. It's deeper than just, I want to go and do X. It's like, but I need that. I'm clinging on to that because that defines who I am. That's, I've had all this other stuff going on in my life. So there's a lot more than just good.
And I think that complexity of presentation of themes, I suppose, like it's not rammed down your throat in this like very like on a pedestal way, like this is wholly good and this is wholly bad. Like no, like they are showing both sides. They lean more towards the Shinra is terrible and saving the planet at all costs is probably worth it, but it's not wholly just going down that. And I think that going down that path, and I think that's one of the things that has made it, because for me, like, it's still like the best story in a game. Okay, it might not be the most skillfully presented or like the best written or the most groundbreaking, like the form that it takes is hardly groundbreaking, but it's the best story in the game, in part because it stood that test of time for so long. Like, it's 23 years later and the story is still interesting to think about because of that subjectivity that's built into it and because there's internal conflict throughout it. So therefore it's still interesting to look at and decide, like, which side do you, well, not which side do you take, but just to play those two sides off of each other. And
it doesn't let the player off scot-free. It's not like you've got a pass to do whatever you want because you're the good guys. It's like, we're presenting this and you need to think about it. Well, you don't need to, you don't have to at all, but you're going to get more out of it, and we're not going to shy away from sharing this stuff to you. So you either ignore it or you at least give it some sort of thought and think about what this means beyond what you're doing.
Yeah, and it stood the test of time as well because it's a discussion of things, all those things that I've just mentioned, the rich and the poor, corporate control over elected government, ecology over sort of mining the planet for wealth and power and energy and all that stuff. Like, it's a discussion of those things, and those are things that we're discussing now in the world more than ever. So it was relevant then, but you could argue that the game's only becoming more relevant. And I think this is the thing with Final Fantasy VII Remake. The game was always good, so long as they didn't just cock it up into like royally, which they didn't. Because of the themes in the game, it was always going to find a place today amongst existing fans of Final Fantasy VII and new ones. If you were prepared to engage in the story, because the themes and the story are super relevant for today, like super relevant, like, you know, I say arguably more relevant now than they were. So that's also one of the reasons why I think it's one of the best stories, because it stood the test of time like almost no other game. Like narratively, it's one of its crowning glories is still so meaningful today.
And so one of those themes is that notion of freedom and people fighting for it and people losing it and some people being happy not having it and not disrupting the status quo and living their lives in a certain way because that's easy. Yeah. And that, I feel like that notion of freedom was something that was very well designed into the gameplay as well, because that's one of the things I remember, getting that airship for the first time, that was one thing. Getting the submarine that felt in the way that when you watch, I don't know, like a, you know, Blue Planet style documentary, nature documentary, that under the sea environment felt like a far more alien thing. You take to the skies, that feels like freedom. You go underwater, that feels far more like exploration of the unknown, but in a chilling way, in a way that's like this. Some of this is scary, and so coming up against something like the Emerald weapon, which was the thing that I think probably the boss I remember more than any others, but probably the one that I banged my head against a wall against. And I don't know if I did Ruby weapon, because that's a harder boss, right? That's considered to be a harder boss than the Emerald one.
I'm not sure which one's supposed to be harder. I mean, both of them were pretty challenging.
Yeah, I remember the Emerald one. I remember the amount of work I put into that. There was a time limit on it that made it a whole other thing, and even the way that was designed, I think there was a 20-minute time limit on that fight, which tells you something immediately. It's like, okay, so presumably that's considered you're only just going to make it if you are going to make it. And it says, I'm going to be here for 20 minutes working this out. And it's 20 minutes not of just sat there trying to work out like what to do. It's almost full on. You need to go into that fight with a game plan, which means probably you need to have done it a couple of times at least. Yeah. And then combining all of those other things together, and the materia and what, who's doing what, and strategies. Like, I look back on it and I'm kind of amazed that I managed to beat it. I think because in examining this, it's made me realise that I used to play games in a different way to I play them now. I don't think I put the same amount of time or effort or energy or thought into games outside of playing them. Like Final Fantasy VII was a game that I was thinking about when I wasn't playing it. I was thinking about how do I do that and planning it, and like, oh, maybe I could try this, maybe I could do that. Yeah, well, and I just don't know that I do that anymore. I think maybe that's a sign of the times, or I don't know.
I think it's probably a sign of age. Yeah, more. Yeah. You got more free thinking time when you're younger, I suppose. So on those tough battles, I remember. I mean, I was only 12 when I played this, and I played Chrono Trigger after this, I think. So I think my only and I hadn't played Final Fantasy 1 to 6. This was the first Final Fantasy I'd played at that point. And I think the only JRPG, I'm trying to think, so I'm not including Zelda as a JRPG, but the only JRPG I think I played seriously before this was the Pokemon games on Game Boy. I think that's right. And I just remember coming to this and just, things like, the scale of the battles like that and the complexity of the battles that you're talking about. I mean, compared to Pokemon, which I love, don't get me wrong, I love Pokemon, but compared to that, it's just like, whoa, like this is a whole new thing. Like they're both vaguely the same genre, but this is way beyond. Like, everything about it was way beyond what Pokemon had. The plot, the characters. There's barely any plot in Pokemon, is there? It's like go and get go and do all the gym badges and get all the Pokemon and come back. And the fighting, the combat system in that is, I mean, compared to Final Fantasy VII at that time, was just like nothing nothing it can't even be compared. And then it was all the stuff around, like when you're in combat, just the look of the game, like all the spells, and when the summons were coming in, I just remember first like getting the first summons. It's like, whoa, like this is
Knights of the Round. It was like a 90-second animation.
Another secret. You just went through all the secret stuff. You keep knocking around,
yeah. And then you get mime, and it repeats it, and it's like, oh, I'm just going to sit here for several minutes just watching my Knights of the Round doing damage to Emerald Weapon.
Yeah, so it was all just it was just such a massive step up for me. In other games like that I'd played, and I still think today I don't know if there's been a game that's as impactful that I've ever played since. There are games that I absolutely love and adore from that era as well. Metal Gear Solid, Gran Turismo 1. But I don't know. I'm struggling to think of, like, is there another game that I've played that is as impactful, that I've consistently, like, I don't know if I think about it every day, but Final Fantasy VII goes through my mind in some form, probably like every week, probably. Like, that's probably a thing. Like, I'm not sitting there sort of just sort of meditating on it for hours at a time, but I'll probably, something will remind me of something. There'll be like, you know, whenever I see like a sword in anything, it's like, wow, is it as good as Cloud's sword? Like anything like that. Yeah, like
there's some swords like that in Demon Souls, though, right? Like they've got some.
Yeah, there
weapons
is a
like
giant
that
one like that.
Yeah.
Like anytime I see like an anime kind of haircut, it's always to compare it to Cloud's like quiff bit at the front, like all of that stuff. Like I can't think of another game that, or probably film or book or anything, that I was like very regularly comes up in my mind. Like it's almost like, you know, it's just been imprinted on. It's just got this like blueprint, this membrane across my entire mind of this stuff being subconsciously or consciously filtered, and that's like a giant chunk of it is Final Fantasy VII.
Well, so I don't know that Final Fantasy is directly responsible for that, because that leads into this point that we'll probably perhaps finish on as we start to wrap up. But as I went back and started looking at Final Fantasy VII and started researching it, and was looking at YouTube videos, and there's loads. Obviously, people are still making videos to this day about the original Final Fantasy, let alone Final Fantasy VII, let alone the remake. And it's all about, you know, how to use the battle system in this way, or sometimes how to cheese it, or how to be the most efficient at leveling, how to, you know, just get the most out of it. And I feel like seeing all of that, games developers can't help but be influenced by that level of discussion that's going on, and that level of dissection that's going on. And I think it is what allows or encourages developers, people like From Software making Demon Souls, that has all of these, going back to the original release of Demon Souls, all of these what feel like very obscure things of how could you ever possibly know about world tendency, or how to influence it, or even when you do, what it means, or how these things are connected, without having a community of people, without seeking out other people and having this hive mind approach to it, either explicitly or just, I'm going to go online and look up some stuff. That is, you know, you're tapping into that. And the notion of like having a game like Final Fantasy VII, where there is a system that you can interact with to quite a low level extent, or a high extent, like the materia system, feels like it gives permission or encourages developers to develop games that require or benefit from online communities, where people are dissecting it, and some people will put in hundreds of hours, some people will only put in 10 hours, but everybody's got their own take on it. Everybody can learn from each other. You can experiment. You can be the person that optimizes everything. You can be the maverick who just wants to try out crazy combos and perhaps learn something that other people aren't learning in doing that. I feel like a lot of that stuff, like Demon Souls, comes from a game like Final Fantasy VII, where they took the step, they made that kind of brave decision to have a system that was so detailed that it benefited from that online community, even post-release, kind of, you know, in the years after.
Yeah, well, I think
then From Software can look at that and say, well, do you know what? There is a willingness to do this. People, not everybody will, but some people will, and that we can design a game that requires or benefits from additional outside kind of research and not have to explain absolutely everything in our game, and not have that be a negative. That can be it can enrich it for the people that want to explore it. Yeah. And I feel like that there's a line there that goes from Final Fantasy VII to Demon Souls.
Yeah. Yeah, possibly. I think it's definitely a game that has shown that like the legend of the game and the conversation around the game can be as big and as impactful, I suppose, as the game itself. Because you can, just like you can in Demon Souls or Dark Souls, you could only play those games, Final Fantasy VII, Dark Souls, Demon Souls, you can play those for like an hour, 2 hours, and then never play them again, or never play them. And you can still go online and consume so much stuff that you know all about them, and you know all about their systems and the story and the characters and the locations and everything. And you never have to touch the game once, probably. I mean, it'll help to get you that first-hand sort of reaction to it. But you could probably legitimately understand not only the story, but all the gameplay systems and everything in there without ever touching it. Because
it has a cultural significance far beyond just personal experience. It means more. It means more to the collective whole than it does just, I think, to one individual person.
Well, yeah, and I think
what it does for that medium.
Yeah, and when the time it came out as well on PS1, a couple of years into PS1's life, it for me, and I mean obviously for other people as well, like the reaction to it at the time, we weren't unique in our sort of positive reaction to it. It genuinely did feel like, oh my god, okay, like we're into gaming has just moved into a new place now. Like this has just blown everything that's anywhere vaguely similar to this completely out of the water. It's not like we have genuinely moved on. This is a even at that time, even at 12 years old for me, like you just knew it's like, whoa, this is different. Like this is a new thing. Like games have gone to the next, they've opened a new door here, they've gone to the next level, like whatever cliche you want to use, like this, Final Fantasy, forced it into a new place. And there you have it. What makes Final Fantasy VII so great? Do come and tell us what you think by getting in touch with us on social media. We're at Indie by Design across all platforms. And if you visit our Twitter, you'll also find a link to our Discord server. And also do check out doublefinebook.com to secure your copy of 20 Double Fine Years, which is our officially licensed and endorsed book of all things Double Fine, from Psychonauts and Psychonauts 2 to Broken Age, Brutal Legends, and quite literally everything in between. That's at doublefinebook.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.